because today is my first time meeting Chris. But what I do know is that my friends Adrian Kinney and Garrett Reppenhagen, who I worked with first at Iraq Vets Against the War and later at Veterans for Peace, where I was a board member a few years ago, suggested that of all of the Afghanistan veterans that there are out there, that Chris is the one we should talk to and make sure his their voice are heard by this audience. So I'm really grateful for Chris's presence today. They're the digital organizer for Veterans for Peace and the lead organizer for Gamers for Peace initiative. Chris was a civil affairs operator in the United States Marine Corps from 2004 to 2010, with combat deployments to Fallujah, Iraq, and Helmand Province. I wonder, we may have been in Fallujah at the same time, Chris, actually. I was attached for the fall offensive, so conversation for a later date.
Yeah.
But also assigned to Helmand Province in Afghanistan. Chris is a lifelong gamer who's committed to using digital gaming and hobby spaces to engage anti-war and social justice activism while combating the predatory recruiting practices of the military. With the endorsements of Adrian and Garrett at Vets for Peace, I imagine your perspective is going to be no less poignant than those of Phyllis and Kathy. So welcome and thank you for being here, Chris.
Thanks for having me. Well, thanks for that introduction. I actually don't know how I'm supposed to follow up Kathy and Phyllis. That they take most of the words out of my mouth and with much more eloquence than I could ever muster. And I want to thank them for their guidance and wisdom on this subject, and thank everybody for attending. As Will said, I was a United States Marine Corps reservist from 2004 to 2010 and combat deployments to Fallujah, Iraq, and Afghanistan as civil affairs operator, which many of you might not be familiar with what that job is. And I used to run around over the last decade since getting out of the Marine Corps. We used to run around saying it's humanitarian aid on steroids. And that's quickly been revised over the course of the last couple of years to I did humanitarian aid at gunpoint. Where I was holding the gun, and the story and the job of a civil affairs operator is to be a money-powered grunt, run around with a lot of money in a backpack, and an infantry unit sometimes would kick down a door, and I would follow up and take the homeowner aside and ask them, "How are you doing today? I apologize for your door. Here's $600 for it. My friends are going to search your home for drugs, weapons, and other people that we're looking for. Would you care to tell me before they have to do that if there's things here? Also, while we're having this conversation, where do you get your water from? Where do your kids go to school? Where do you get your medical aid from?" And what I've realized is as I was plugging these people for information and getting them into our BAT system, biometric scanning system, so that we could identify and catalog entire country of civilians, is what I was doing is getting information for intelligence and perpetuating the war machine. In my naivety, as deploying to Afghanistan, I was 24 years old. I was a 24-year-old sergeant, and I really thought I was there helping people. I believed wholeheartedly in my mission as a civil affairs operator that I was bringing peace, or I was offering stability and opportunities to people. I was a militarized Peace Corps, which is oxymoronic now that you look back on it. Now, and I realized the error in my thinking along the way. But civil affairs comes out of a Vietnam tradition, the cat platoons in Vietnam, where you hear the saying, or the saying was born, winning hearts and minds. And that was my job in the Marine Corps. And, you know, that's just a little bit about what I did. And I think the easiest way to get into the rest of this conversation is right now, everyone, including myself, is wondering what's on the horizon, what's happening in Afghanistan, and what's going to be happening in the near future. And I think the first thing that we have to ask ourselves is how we got here, right? What the intention of the war was, and I use war as a term very loosely, because what we didn't do is execute a war against a foreign government and another military force, we occupied civilian neighborhoods and communities in order to do who knows what. As a sergeant, I didn't know. And so why is it like this? It's like this because we have kids coming out of the economic draft that are 16 years old and talking to recruiters before they ever talk to a college recruiter or are given any other opportunity to escape poverty or the systems of oppression that they're in here stateside. And we put them in the military and then tell them to go overseas, armed, trained exclusively in war fighting, and then ask them to build society. I know as a 19-year-old, I was wholly unqualified to determine what should be done to help fish farms in Iraq, or what a hospital needs in Afghanistan, how to conduct contracts and do civil engineering, society building, nation building. And I think we need to remember that humanitarian aid at gunpoint just doesn't work. The efforts of the one export that the United States has is violence through its military. And right now, as we see in Afghanistan with the withdrawal of troops, we still see our export going into that country with drone strikes. We've heard Biden in his withdrawal statement say we are withdrawing so that we can turn around and focus on other areas, other hotspots of terrorism, including Syria. I believe he mentioned Somalia and other sovereign nations in Africa and in the Middle East. But then in the same sentence, turn around and say, and yet be back in Afghanistan again, and reference Afghanistan in the same sentence as for what we're withdrawing from. Days later, we have a drone strike that kills 10 innocent civilians in response to a suicide bomber attack at a gate during evacuation. And latest reports that I've been seeing and articles that I've been reading is that in the aftermath of that explosion, I believe it was roughly 170 civilians were killed, Afghan civilians were killed, roughly. And eyewitness reports and things that are coming out is saying that the Marines were the ones that were killing the civilians after the initial explosion. And that's because humanitarian aid done through the military doesn't work. And we've seen that over the course of 20 years. We've been doing counterinsurgency operations, COIN operations, and civil affairs since we first went into Iraq and Afghanistan. So a 19-year-old is not qualified to nation build. And that's who we have doing this in nebulous orders where we just hold and occupy territory. I can't tell you how many hospitals that I built in Afghanistan or how many schools that I built would get ransacked and then get rebuilt. And yet not understanding that I was a money man and my funds were just the funds that American people, the US, needed for its own infrastructure. We are sending people to countries and telling them to nation build in a nation that can't build itself currently. We have kids that are coming from crumbling homes and schools that are underfunded, building schools overseas in the name of the military. And it just continually, I can't stress enough how much that just doesn't work. Especially when you're ill prepared to deal with cultural ramifications and implications, nation and political ramifications, when politics and culture are not taught in academic circles for our children, and they're not taught in the military either. So I think that the 7 points that Will has outlined is a great starting point. And we have to remember that repealing the AUMF is a priority. Cutting the budget of the Pentagon is a priority. I was looking at some numbers. There's a YouTuber that we've hosted on Gamers for Peace, who did a great video about the $2.7 trillion cost of what Afghanistan cost us, cost in total. And they gave great numbers, great examples of what we could have done with that money. $80 billion ends houselessness in the United States permanently. A one-time $80 billion expenditure ends houselessness. For about $1 trillion, I believe it was, you get a light railroad, a high-speed light railroad system that gets to every major city and acts as the center hub for travel and helps break the dependence on planes for high-speed travel. You also have money for pandemic response, Medicare for all, and the list goes on of what you could do with the $2.7 trillion. And we're looking at a bloated defense budget of coming up on, I think if my math is correct, we're at $790 billion with this recent $25 billion addition that there is being proposed and passed through the House. So nearly $800 billion is dedicated to Pentagon spending. And that's money that society needs, infrastructure, the social contract needs locally in and of ourselves. I think how do we prevent this in the future is that we have to work in the intersections of social and climate justice where the military affects the majority of people, not just stateside, but around the world. The United States military is the world's #1 carbon producer. And that's not included in the numbers that we see about what nations have the largest carbon footprint. We don't even calculate, and it's not reported, how much carbon and how much of a contributor to the climate crisis is the United States military. And that's just one aspect. You have the drone assassination program. When drones fly, civilians die. That's inherently true, as Daniel Hale pointed out. Over 90% of drone flights result in civilian death. When in service, I was told many, many times, like, drones save my life. Drones are flying above you, they are saving your life. And I don't believe that was ever actually true. I don't think a drone ever once did something that inherently saved my life under fire. But I know that the information that I was gathering when I was doing humanitarian aid and putting myself out there in order to help the local civilians, the local population of Loy-Calais and Al-Anbar, Southern Inak. I got my deployments mixed up for a second. Loy-Calais in Southern Inak and Inak City Center, District Center, Nawa District Center is the areas that I was in Afghanistan in 2009. I was gathering information for civilians that would inevitably be killed. And there are children that delivered naan, and I worked with to help set up convenience stores that now, when I do the math in my head, they are military-aged men at this point, which either puts them in the crosshairs of the Marines that replaced me a decade later, or in the crosshairs of the Taliban. I do not know if the civilians that I touch the lives of are alive. More than likely, they probably aren't, because of the size of the FOBs that we are operating and starting to establish, which was part of my job. We destroyed farmland. I saw a question in there earlier about the heroin and poppy production of Afghanistan, and that works. And I think we look at everything that's going on right now we have to continue to look at the complexity and nuance of the situation. We are withdrawing so that we can continue to do over the horizon missions in these areas. We have military contractors. We have we have mercenary organizations that are vying for contracts to go in, led by Eric Prince and the Oaks of Blackwater. We have ramping up. We have an administration that is getting hit on both sides of on one side, identity politics, talking about how we need to be in there for the sake of women and children, and fear mongering the Taliban impact on those populations. So we have the drumbeat from a left position urging us to stay there, and we have the right getting to point at a suicide bombing and continue to beat the war drums there. And we have an administration that has already said that it wants to continue doing over the horizon attacks. We also have a ramp up against China and their Belt and Road Initiative. And as the Belt and Road Initiative looks at going into the Middle East, Afghanistan and things, where does that put us in relation to that? The only export, as I said at the start, the only export we currently have is violence, whether that's humanitarian aid at gunpoint or lifting up and exporting a military to a militarized government of warlords in this area. That is all that we are offering to these places, because we cannot take care of ourselves here at home. How can we export humanitarian aid when we are facing our largest houseless crisis ever? When we have hundreds of thousands of hospitalizations due to pandemic response, a failed pandemic response that saw people going back to work because we couldn't do the right thing and put a UBI or get benefits to people as they need them. I think we have to address the economic draft if we want any chance of actually preventing further devastation against these populations. Kids talking to recruiters, the military, shameless plug for just a brief moment, but the military is operating in gaming spaces and in online spaces directly to recruit kids as young as 13, put them in the military pipeline through games. If you look at numbers from 2020, about 13,000 new recruits at the age of 18 said that they were directly contacted and influenced to join the military through Twitch and gaming spaces. There's 13,000 children that a recruiter contacted them through the hobbies and safe spaces that they try to get away from the failing infrastructure that they face every single day. The reason these kids are in video games is because parents are working 2 jobs and can't create a family life or do anything. A lot of children, how many grandparents see kids with iPads in their hands playing Candy Crush or things like that? And those are the spaces, that's the pipeline that the military now occupies, and is why we continue to have this expanded and bloated budget for a military that has no purpose. We outspend and have a larger military than the next, I think it's 20 nations, half of which are our allies. And we have no conventional warfare on the horizon. We have drone warfare on the horizon. We have AI drone warfare. The military looks at these places like games and online digital spaces and doesn't need troops on ground. It needs troops that understand how to occupy understand a virtual space and how to have map awareness or projected awareness of what's around somebody through a TV screen or a computer monitor. I think that starting with repealing and abolishing any AUMF is just the beginning. Drastically cutting the Pentagon's budget needs to be at the forefront, and combating the climate change. California is on fire. Lake Tahoe is on fire. Siberia just is on fire. The place Russia used to send exiles to die in the cold away from civilization because it was so cold is on fire and just put out enough carbon for Germany's emissions, I believe, for at least 1 year, if not 2. And these are the ramifications of our bloated military budget. This is the ramifications of 20 years of attempted nation building, from failed lessons out of Vietnam that translated to failed lessons in Afghanistan. And we need to be combating the military industrial complex, the war machine, in every facet at the intersections of social justice and climate justice. I think I think there's so much to say. I think starting with the Pentagon Papers and getting the 300 names of the people that were on record, getting those names is a place to continue. Getting them tried for their war crimes. George Bush is a war criminal. It can easily be said that you can continue down the line of presidential administrations and call them all war criminals for keeping us in a failed war, a failed occupation, a failed colony building, a failed attempt at imperialism. And the thing is that failed attempt is going to continue. At right now, when I prognosticate and I look at the future, I see manufactured consent in our media and the ability for an argument to be made to mainstream Americans that we should still be in there. I see a resurgence and in the mass memory of the people that we were even at war and in Afghanistan. And from both sides of the argument, both sides of the political spectrum, there's a desire to be there. And it scares me. It scares me because on January 6th, we saw veterans, we saw active service members, and we saw police storm the Capitol. And there's mass unrest in the failed infrastructure of our own nation. And what we're seeing overseas is just that export. So if you want to say that, so like maybe I should recant just a little bit of what I'm saying, right? Maybe we did succeed in our imperialism because we sure as hell made a great copy of America in political unrest there. We've put the lives of civilians in jeopardy around the world wherever our bases are at. We have over 700 military bases around the world. We are occupying sovereign nations. And maybe we have succeeded. And maybe we should work a little bit harder to make sure we don't succeed in that again. I think the 7 points that are outlined is the starting point of where we need to be. And I think that a resurgence in the anti-war movement amongst the youth, it can be found at the intersections of the issues that the youth is facing, that of the people that have avoided the economic draft, the people that are still in economic straits because of school debts, lack of health care, abortion rights or health care, as we see Texas eliminating abortion rights. These are major, major things that we face and that we are exporting these crises around the world. And so thank you, everybody, for being here today to discuss these things. This is the rantings of just a Marine that did some time boots on ground and ran around with money, signing blank checks that could have easily went to cities in Brooklyn or Philadelphia, where I'm located, or any place else in this country to really help people and impact lives in a better way. And the military is not the way to export that humanitarian aid that's much needed. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.